Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, former NFL scout and currently director of football and research at Sports Info Solutions, joined by Aaron Schatz, the godfather of football analytics and the founder of Football Outsiders. As always, our versatile producer Justin Stein is on the controls, and later in the episode, we will have John Verros on to talk about injury insights related to a certain Tua Tagovailoa. But first, Aaron, how are you doing this week?
I am a little under the weather, so I apologize if my voice sounds a little froggy. I am in Louisville for meetings at beautiful Edge Sports headquarters. And when you said a certain Tua Tagovailoa, I'm like, how many other Tua Tagovailoas are there?
Well, they do have to write like the TU on his
I guess
on his
brother's
jersey.
on the team, right?
All right, though, but we've got a busy slate this week, and with you a little bit under the weather, we want to keep it quick. So let's jump right in, and let's have a rare occurrence this week for our first most important game of the week. What do you have for us?
Yeah, we normally don't cover the Thursday games because normally the podcast doesn't come out till late Thursday afternoon. But the most important game this week is so much more important for the playoffs than any other game that we felt we had to get in early and discuss Indianapolis at Houston. Houston makes the playoffs 76% of the time if they win this game, only 38% if they lose. Indianapolis, 86% of the time with a win, 43% of the time with a loss. Basically, the winner of this game is in the driver's seat for the AFC South. The loser of this game goes into the big dog pile for the AFC wildcard.
Yeah, colossal game. And of course, I went straight to the injury report trying to look at the status of T.Y. Hilton. And it sounds like he's questionable going into the game. So as of podcast taping time, at least, we're in the cold on that one. That would make it a lot easier for me.
Yeah, now here's another interesting injury, though, that also is really important, and it's better for the Indianapolis offense, even if they're missing T.Y. Hilton. And that's Justin Reed from the Texans, who's been really good this year. He's got 29 total points saved. I checked that out myself on the SIS Data Hub. That makes him one of the top safeties in the league, and he's going to miss this game with a concussion.
Yeah, that is a good point by you. Tough one to miss, and I guess part of the loss in that tough game against the Ravens last week.
Yeah. Here's an interesting split. Houston's defense is number 1 in DVOA on first downs, but they are 30th on seconds and 32nd on third downs. I have no idea what would cause that kind of split. The Indianapolis offense is close to average in all 3 downs.
You said that was the Houston defense that has that weird split?
Yes.
That's really interesting. So something that they're doing different. You know, when you see first and second different than third down, that makes more sense to me. Seeing this kind of the other way around, a little bit more confusing.
The other thing about the Houston defense I'll point out is that they're only 25th in defending receivers in the passing game. So this could be a big game for Nyheim Hines.
That will be interesting to keep an eye on. I'm always curious, you know, you see these division games, and we've seen so many kind of weird things happen in the division matchups. And in this one, I don't think there's almost nothing that could happen that would really surprise me here. Both these teams have looked really good and really questionable at different times in the season. I'd say if T.Y. Hilton is playing, I like the chances of Jacoby Brissett and the Colts offense to do some damage, especially with that injury that you were talking about there.
Their overall rating would be much higher if you take out the Brian Hoyer game. Hoyer was so bad in that game. Brissett has been so much better than him that the difference between these two teams would be much larger if you just don't consider that game.
And the defense for the Colts still very, very injured, but some improvements as they're not so bare as they were early in the year on that side of the ball. So, Deshaun Watson's funny to me because he's one of these quarterbacks, for as much as we're comparing Lamar Jackson to Michael Vick these days, Deshaun Watson is one of these guys where he would drive kind of both coordinators crazy. Whereas if you're a defensive coordinator, there's not a lot you can do against Deshaun Watson when he's doing things really well. But if you're an offensive coordinator, there's also not a lot you can do to get Deshaun Watson to play really well within the scope of what you kind of have planned. You're kind of at the mercy of how he's going to be playing on that particular day.
Yeah, he's not a guy you design runs for, I don't think, in the same way as Lamar Jackson. I think that he's much more of a scrambling quarterback. And I will point out that the Indianapolis defense this year has been below average against quarterbacks as runners. So that's a positive for Deshaun Watson in this game.
Yeah, and I would say he's not just I don't just mean designed in terms of designed runs. I mean designed in terms of designed passes too. I think that he's
right. He's out. He's off script a lot. He's out of structure.
So it's kind of a difficult one to handicap here. Add in the division stuff, the Thursday night, and man, we got a huge game for playoff odds there. I mean, you summed it up. It seems like the winner versus the loser. It's 76 and 86% versus 38 and 43%. The numbers say it all.
Yeah, and there's one other. Houston does have another small advantage. I mean, they have the small advantage of being the home team on a Thursday night game. They have also a small advantage in special teams. Both of these teams have had troubles with field goals this year, but Houston has a field position advantage this year on kickoffs and punts. So that definitely could come into play.
We'll be keeping an eye out for it. We remember that game earlier in the year. It ended up 30-23 in Indianapolis that day with both quarterbacks going over 300 yards. So we'll see how it plays out this time.
All right, let's take a look at the second game we're going to preview, and this is the biggest game of the week for the Super Bowl, and it is Sunday Night Football. They flexed us a good one. Green Bay at San Francisco. Green Bay makes the Super Bowl in 19% of simulations where they win, 9% where they lose. San Francisco, 25% when they win, 17% when they lose.
Yeah, I stumbled upon a kind of fun stat while I was doing research for this one, and that is on pre-snap motion percentage. So that's one of the things that we track here, all the pre-snap motions that different teams run, along with what type of motion, who's in motion, and all sorts of other intricacies. But the San Francisco 49ers lead the league in pre-snap motion, and Green Bay is number 9. But check out this top 5 list in terms of teams that use pre-snap motion the most. It's the 49ers, the Patriots, the Ravens, the Titans, and the Chiefs. Not a bad set right there. At least 4 out of 5 I'm going in terms of
I was going to say, your mind is thinking, those are the creative offensive minds of the NFL. And then the Tennessee Titans with Arthur Smith. Like, you don't think of Arthur Smith as one of the creative minds of the NFL.
I don't know. He's making Tannehill look pretty good the past few weeks. Maybe the guy's a genius.
That is absolutely true. Tannehill has been much better than Mariota. And so, yeah, it's an interesting list. There's no question about it.
So I thought that was a fun split here. Both of these teams that make a lot of use of it. Obviously, you think of that with the Niners in their game.
Green Bay is not on that list, right?
Green Bay is 9th on the list.
9th on that list.
We were talking early before the season started about how Rodgers supposedly hated the play action and didn't want to run any of it. And LaFleur was bringing his whole plan. Everybody was obsessed with a while about how these guys couldn't coexist. I think Rodgers is second amongst quarterbacks in total points, having just a fine season with LaFleur. And I think the increase in that pre-snap motion, that ability to identify what you've got defensively, I think it's really important.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting here, Green Bay's relative pass defense weaknesses are against number 1 wide receivers and tight ends. So I guess we have to depend on John to talk a little bit later about what the injury situation is for Emmanuel Sanders and George Kittle. But they could do a lot of damage in this game if they are healthy.
Interesting. We will we'll check in with that on him. Since I will take down the fourth wall. We've already recorded John's segment, and we didn't get insights on those. But you can check out John's Twitter, where he will have updates at Verros John on those very 2 injuries that Aaron just brought up.
The relative weakness of the San Francisco defense, not weakness, strength. Not relative strength. They're strong against a ton of things because they're historically strong. This is Aaron Jones, who's been a phenomenal pass receiver this year, against San Francisco, the number 1 defense in the league against running backs as receivers.
Interesting. So that sounds like a trouble matchup right there.
That's a strength against strength matchup. I think you're going to see the 49ers run a lot in this game. Green Bay is dead last in adjusted line yards allowed on defense. We know that San Francisco likes to run a lot. They've got the 3-headed backfield. I don't know what Brady's current health is, but there's Coleman and there's Mostert. I think they're going to end up running a lot in this game.
Yeah, with the current script, it's hard to imagine kind of that not being the case. The way I think Green Bay's defense is built a little bit more to play against the pass in terms of both their pass rush and their secondary. And then I think that's what the Niners want to do. We've seen Garoppolo struggle a little bit in the past few weeks. And I think that one thing that they'd be looking to do is kind of control the game script, take the ball out of Aaron Rodgers' hands, and try to shorten this game as much as possible. That'll be a fun one to take a look at. I think it's going to be tough for Green Bay going into San Francisco on Sunday night, but hard for me to bet against Aaron Rodgers here. I think they obviously going into this one have the better quarterback.
I mean, I think there's been a lot of discussion this year about the question about whether defenses, offenses are more consistent than defenses. So what does that mean when you have two teams like New England and San Francisco that are excelling so much on the defensive side of the ball? How much of that can you expect for them to keep up for the rest of the year? We'll get to New England in a moment, but for San Francisco, that's obviously a question. They've had basically their three worst defensive games in the last 3 weeks, but how much of that is just that they have trouble with Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury, and how much of that is the defense is regressing towards the mean?
So if we can digress just for a little bit, just thinking about when we measure offenses, like you said, the stability year over year is going to be stronger for offenses. We tend to think that offenses have more responsibility for winning and losing than defenses do, as kind of like a percentage of the whole pie when we look at the numbers. But the history of football civilization would think, half defense, half offense, half defense, and then throw in, some cut of the pie for special teams in terms of importance.
Well, the ratio we always go with is 4 to 3 to 1.
Interesting. And how did you guys stumble upon that ratio?
Well, it turns out that Chase Stewart did some research at Football Perspective and came out with the ratio of 4 to 3. And then we looked at DVOA, and if you look at over a few years, you'll find that the best and the worst ratings on offense tend to be about 1/3 higher than the best and the worst ratings on defense. And the best and the worst ratings on special teams tend to be about 1/3 lower than the best and the worst ratings on defense. So it ends up working to about a 4 to 3 to 1 ratio of offense to defense to special teams.
I'm glad I asked that. I'm sure I've read that before and forgotten that into the deep depths of my mind. But that's a good reminder of how you guys approach that. And I think an interesting question for any sort of football analyst out there that I don't know if we have a definitive. That certainly sounds like in the right ballpark, more offense than defense, but somewhere near not a crazy far away from being even. Probably closer to even than like 3/4, 1/4.
Right. But just because they're even in importance doesn't mean that they're even in predictability. And that's where a lot of the discussion has been during this season has been, are the San Francisco and New England defenses as likely to keep playing at this level as, say, the Baltimore and Kansas City and Dallas offenses are?
Because we know more about those offenses more quickly.
Because offenses tend to be more consistent, and there tends to be more, like the information that we learn about offenses early in the season tends to carry on more than the information that we learn about defense.
Interesting. So I wonder, since we're not just limited as people, we're not limited like the computers are to just the numbers of performance, what the performance numbers have been to this point. It could be a matter of that we're not capturing stuff as well as we could be in terms of what's going on that side of the ball. If you have much better measures of something, then it's going to stabilize more quickly, and those measures are going to be more consistent over time. Like I think at this point with passing, we've come a long way with that.
There may be better ways to measure defense than what we're doing now. That's a possibility.
So that might help clarify that, because I think if you take, computers have many benefits over people, but the one thing that a person can do is kind of tell you about who the different players, we can look at more than just the inputs that we're putting into this particular model when we're looking at how predictive defensive performance is.
The other reasonable possibility is that the quarterback has so much control over the game from that one position that some of what we see as defense is the quarterbacks that they face. Even after doing opponent adjustments for defense, maybe our opponent adjustments for defense aren't strong enough, and even more of defensive value is about the quarterbacks that they face, because that's the theory of why offense is more consistent, because that one position is so important. That it's the consistency at that one position that creates consistency with offense.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's some combination of the greater importance of that position and the greater ability to measure that position that I think if we could tease out how much of each of those is going on there. I think we'll be smarter in a few years once we've kind of answered that question and we're on to the next one. All right, enough digression here. You wanted to make one more point?
No, I was going to say we'll get on to the next game. We'll talk about great offense and great defense when we get to our fourth game of the week. The third game of the week is big for both the Super Bowl and the playoffs, and that's Seattle at Philadelphia, the game that got flexed out of Sunday night and is now going to be played at 1 o'clock Eastern time, which is not good for the Seattle Seahawks. But Seattle makes the playoffs in 97% of simulations if they win this game, 80% if they lose. Philadelphia, 49% with a win, 22% with a loss. Seattle is pretty much in, and Philadelphia is mostly just paying for the NFC East title, where whoever loses the NFC East title is probably going to be out.
Yeah, and an interesting matchup here with the Seahawks, who kind of well known for their quarterback, their MVP candidate. The MVP in my book I'll still take him ahead of Lamar Jackson so far throughout the year. But they really want to be running the ball. And against this team in particular, this is a team that I think we know you want to throw the ball against rather than try to attack them on the ground. So it'll be interesting. The Brian Schottenheimer conundrum going into this one is what I have my eyes on.
Not only that, but the Eagles' defense is clearly weaker against wide receivers than against tight ends or running backs in the passing game or the run. You want to be throwing it to your wide receivers. You want to be throwing it to Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf in this game. You want Wilson to have the ball in his hands to win this game.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. It's hard to look at it any other way. And then, the Eagles on the other side, we've got them 9th in points saved as a run defense this year. Much stronger there than they are in terms of pass defense, of course, per our ratings. Then flip the game on its head, and we've got a surprisingly struggling Carson Wentz. I'm wondering, do you have any take on what we've seen with Carson Wentz lately?
Over the course of the entire year, the Philadelphia offense is still a little bit above average, but the passing game is average, and I know that it's struggled in the last few weeks. I don't know if there's something real going on there or if it's just a case that sort of splits half. But I think there's a little bit of opponent. Some of it is the opponent. Like in our numbers, he's been adjusted upwards in 5 of his last 6 games because of playing difficult opponents. So I think that maybe the schedule has been a little tough for him.
Yeah, we've got him 18th in points earned this year, which is probably a little bit better than.
Yeah, we have them 17th in passing DVOA, so it's pretty close.
Right, and I think where you're considering opponent adjustments that lead into that a little bit more, I think the reason why you see that with the points earned metric is because we're controlling a little bit for some weaknesses that have happened on the offense. We've seen drop passes. I mean, we don't have to talk about Nelson Aguilar in that Patriots game last week.
We'll leave it to the Philadelphia Fire Department to talk about Nelson Aguilar.
He's the only speed on their offense, and he can't catch the ball. And aside from that, it's like you stop Ertz, and I don't know what great options Carson Wentz has. And so I think that's why when we take this points earned, the stat that kind of separates the quarterback from the offense a little bit more, you see him move up the board just a little bit.
Now, I don't know if they could stop Ertz, because one big danger for Seattle in this game is that they're only 23rd against tight ends.
Interesting. Missing good old Camp Chancellor there for that old Legion of Boom.
Although I will say that I have not separated that stat out to before and after the arrival of Diggs.
Right. Who's looked pretty good from I've only seen a handful of their snaps over there, but he's looked good from what I saw.
All right, let's talk about the last game of the week, which is surprisingly low in importance. But we should preview it anyway because it's number 1 against number 1. It's the number 1 on offense by DVOA, Dallas Cowboys, at the number 1 on defense by DVOA, New England Patriots. Even though surprisingly, the odds of making the Super Bowl do not change that much based on who wins or loses this game, because Dallas's odds are low because they have to win. They're not likely to get the first or second seed, and they have to win the division to get in. And New England's odds stay super high because at this point, it's very, very likely that they get either the 1 or the 2 seed.
Yeah, we look at this game, and it's you mentioned the strengths against strengths, and on the other side, it's a little bit weakness against weakness. Whereas I think the Cowboys' pass defense has struggled a bit lately, and the Patriots' passing game has kind of notably struggled. a bunch. And then, we flip it on the other side of the ball. And I don't think Dak Prescott and the Cowboys scare the Patriots at all, really.
Stephon Gilmore on Amari Cooper, baby. I want to see it all night long. It's going to be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, so the matchups here, I'm kind of curious to see, but I would kind of bet on more of the Patriots game scripts that we've seen of late with not a whole lot of scoring, rather than, as much as we love Dak Prescott and everybody wants to put him in the MVP conversation, I think he's a win-with guy. I think he's a good quarterback, but I think to say that he's going to come and dismantle this sort of a defense, it's hard for me to picture that. I think Jerry Jones knows it. You hear the way he talks about Ezekiel Elliott. So I'd be betting on kind of a slower game script going on here. What do you think?
I'm really curious to see what Dallas does in this one, because on one hand, if you're going to attack the New England defense, the way to do it is to run at them. Right? They're only 14th in adjusted line yards on defense, so they allow, they can be pushed around a little bit up front. Dallas's offense is third. On the other hand, the Dallas offense has been notably better this year when they spread it out and let Dak sling it. They have the second biggest difference in the league between yards per play in shotgun and yards per play with Prescott under center. So everything points to the idea that their offense works best when they spread it out and let Dak throw. But is that what works best against this Patriots defense?
Right. It'll be interesting to see. I'm curious, in terms of efficiency, we actually have the Cowboys pretty good in points earned rushing. We've got them third in the league at 26 points earned rushing this year. And I'm curious, just 45% positive play rate, so more average on that side.
We have them third in the league. We have them both third passing and third running, and it works out to number one overall because of what their pass-to-run ratio is. But, yeah, we have them third also running the ball.
Interesting. Maybe you can spread the Patriots out to run, and that's really the way to go.
Well, that is the way to go, and a lot of teams have shown, but I don't know if that's really what Dallas does.
Right. Certainly, Amari Cooper helps, but he can be neutralized. You got Gallup spreading the field a little bit for them. But I'm with you. That hasn't been the bread and butter of what they've done. We should see pre-snap motion from them, though, and plenty of that.
Yeah, the Patriots have been a little weaker against tight end. This might be a good game for Witten. And New England does have an advantage. I will point out, special teams-wise, obviously they've had poor field goal kicking this year. They're on their third kicker. But they have a field position advantage on kickoffs and punts in this game. So if they do want to play sort of a slower game script, defense and running game, they do have that field position advantage when it comes to the kicking game.
All right, let's fast forward and play post-game storylines. Dallas goes into New England and wins. Dallas is legit. They've arrived. They're a contender. Is this the end of Tom Brady?
Analytics Twitter will go nuts. Because if Dallas wins this game, it backs up, one, the idea that Dak Prescott is a leading MVP candidate, which is a leading storyline of Analytics Twitter. And two, the idea that defense is less consistent than offense, and the Patriots' defense doesn't mean anywhere near as much as the Dallas offense, which is another big storyline of Analytics Twitter. So Analytics Twitter is waiting for Dallas to win this game and win this game big.
Interesting. I'm always rooting for analytics, but in this one, I think they're going to keep waiting. It's hard for me to imagine Dallas going into New England and stealing this one there. Even with that offense against defense matchup, I think that the storyline actually after this one's going to be, oh, my Belichick and Jason Garrett, please get some.
The Cowboys' defense has been surprisingly mediocre this year, and the Patriots' offense has been surprisingly better than people think in that it's a little bit above average. It has not sucked. People talk about it sucking only because it's nowhere near as good as Patriots offenses of years past, but I believe it's actually 12th in DVOA right now. They're a little bit above average. They had one really good game in week 1 against Pittsburgh. They had one really, really bad game against Buffalo. The rest of their games have been basically average or a little bit above average. So I think that they have the advantage on that side of the ball, and that's what gives them that plus home field gives them advantage in this game. The number one defense and the Dallas number one offense should cancel out.
All right. We'll be looking forward to seeing it. Anything else you want to touch on before we move forward to John Verros?
Move on to the injuries, my man.
All right, John, we have you on every week, but I think this one will be the most anticipated in a while. I know for me it was, because I need some sort of an explanation of what to expect from Tua Tagovailoa. I think obviously there's a lot in the media right now, and you'll hear if you turn on ESPN this morning, people saying anywhere from he's had all these surgeries, he's not durable, there should be questions about him in the long term. But I think in reality, not all surgeries are created equal. We have some things that are degenerative, and we have other things that have big re-injury risk or can affect performance. What is going on here?
Yeah, so you're right. Tua's had several different surgeries in his career already, two of which were the tightrope procedure for his high ankle sprains. Those, although they're kind of exploratory surgeries, there's not too much research on there supporting the long-term health of those surgeries. I'm not worried about those surgeries going forward.
So we've talked about those a little bit, and that sounded like basically he had the high ankle sprain. They basically attach a separate mock ligament to kind of hold everything in there in place. And eventually, that holds up until the regular thing heals up. And then, so it sounds like a pretty minimally invasive sort of thing. Risky and kind of unusual, but it does, that part of it doesn't seem like it would have the biggest risk for future. It's kind of like an arthroscopic surgery. I know you've told me before, that's not something that you would be worried about, the surgery itself being something that would affect the person in the future.
Right. Certainly only risky due to the lack of research and studies that have happened in terms of long-term effects of it. But in the here and now, when you're just thinking of the mechanisms of the injury and the surgery itself, nothing long-term to worry about. Now, everybody knows, and the reason why Tua has been in the media so much lately is because of this posterior hip dislocation and subsequent fracture of the pelvis. And now we're talking about something seriously jeopardizing obviously his season, he's ruled out now, but his career and his longevity going forward.
Yeah, so we all heard Bo Jackson at first. Now it sounds like the prognosis is a little bit more positive than that. Is this the same injury? And if not, what's different about this from the Bo Jackson?
Yeah, so Bo Jackson had a subluxation of the hip joint when he was playing, and the legend has it that he actually put it back in the socket himself on the field that day. And that's possible with the subluxation. You can just kind of yank that thing right back into place. Tough guy. But the real side effects to this was that he had a vascular necrosis, which there are blood vessels that go through your leg and hip and down into the femur. And there's very small blood vessels that when your femur dislocates out of the hip socket, those blood vessels can tear and stretch. And that's exactly what happened for Bo, unfortunately, which led to a slow death of the head of the femur and the labrum, or the covering of the head of the femur to the hip. And thus he needed to get a hip replacement, which obviously is a career-ending surgery. I mean, you're just trying to get your life. You're just trying to walk.
Completely degenerated, and he couldn't perform anymore. Not even a risk of re-injury because you just can't play.
You're just done.
So is that what's going on with Tua?
So this is the tricky part with Tua's injury. He not only had a more severe dislocation, whereas Bo subluxed it and put it back in himself, Tua dislocated his hip and needed people at the stadium to yank it back into place for him off the field. So a more severe dislocation. And on top of that, there was a fracture to the pelvis associated with it. So that socket that holds the head of the femur was fractured because it dislocated so violently. So it's a more severe injury, to be honest with you, compared to Bo Jackson's. But thankfully, it's 2019. These guys immediately recognized what was going on at the stadium, put it back into place, hopefully making it so that those blood vessels were able to stay intact and they didn't lose too much blood during the dislocation. So that's the major differences between the two. Now, in the meantime, Tua's had surgery to fix the fractures, which is going to make him non-weight bearing for 6 to 8 weeks. The labrum had to have been repaired Obviously, there was a tear to the labrum covering the head of the femur. That's going to require intensive rehab for, I would say, 6 months before he's really getting back into football activities. But I'm cautiously optimistic that he has avoided avascular necrosis. This is something that an MRI nowadays can see, and you can monitor his status as time goes on. He's not out of the water yet. This is something that can develop over time, and they can notice the death of the femur and the labrum over time, as opposed to with Bo, they had no idea. He just put it back into place, and they just kind of went on their way for a little while before they were like, hey, something serious is going on here.
So let's say, obviously, if that's the condition, that's bad. I'm not even going to try to say those words. But if that's not what it is going on here, if it's not, if he's okay in that regard, can he make a full recovery? Is this something where the labrum is going to be permanently damaged and therefore there's a shelf life on Tua's career? Or is this something where we can see a full return to form and, like Drew Brees with his shoulder, you can find ways to kind of work through it and keep it in top shape?
I think that's a great example. Although it's the shoulder with Drew, it's an example of guys who are counted out to the point where the Chargers let him go, to his hip, where it's a serious injury. And I wouldn't count him out, but certainly the arthritis that he's going to deal with 5 to 10 years from now is going to be pretty traumatic due to this injury. I wouldn't count him out to be worthy of a top 10 pick in the NFL draft because of this, but he's certainly not going to be this speedster running around over the next few years. I would hope that Tua is able to realize, and his team around him is going to realize that this is a serious injury and that he needs to kind of be protected and protect himself in the meantime. I would assume they take the proper precautions to monitor his status of the labrum and the hip joint itself, and that going forward that they are rehabbing him for the rest of his career. He's just on top of his game, because it's not only the socket, the joint itself, but we're also talking about the surrounding muscles that he's going to have to constantly be rehabbing to make sure that this joint is stable. I'm talking about your groin, your hip flexors, your glutes. Everything is going to have to be perfect, and there has to be symmetry on both sides. It's going to be a difficult process for the rest of his career.
Yep. If there's one thing I can tell you about Drew, just being around him for the amount of time, he takes care of that shoulder every single day. He's got a routine like crazy, and it's both shoulders. He keeps the symmetry to make sure it's so. That's the sort of work ethic they would take to overcome this sort of thing. John, I know you're an old world kind of Mediterranean Greek guy, and you do your share of talking with your hands, but I never saw it so violently as today, where I feel like I need to explain to the listeners just how violently he's gesturing with his hands as he's explaining the different sockets and joints that are going on here. So definitely a serious one here with Tua getting John riled up. Thanks for coming on, John.
Thanks. I appreciate it, Matt.
Sports Info Solutions is excited to announce the launch of its public-facing site, SISDataHub.com. The new SIS Data Hub is free for all to use and features detailed player pages and leaderboards that provide some of the best information available. In addition to all of the standard statistics, here you'll find proprietary data collected by SIS Video Scouts, like on-target percentage for quarterback, pressure rates for edge rushers, blown blocks for offensive linemen, and more. You'll also find advanced metrics calculated from all of that data, like independent quarterback rating, total points earned, total points saved, and many, many more statistics, from adjusted blown block percent to positive percentage for receivers, quarterbacks, running backs, broken tackles, air yards, and more. For the most avid football fanatics, a pro version of the Data Hub is also available, which contains everything from the free version as well as filters to split by situation, personnel, and almost anything else imaginable, coverage scheme, run direction, and more. The Data Hub Pro also includes team leaderboards, NCAA data, and the ability to download all data as CSV files. You can register for a free 7-day trial by going to pro.sisdatahub.com. All right. Thank you so much for listening to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. Please help us spread the word about Off the Charts by subscribing, rating, and writing us reviews. Always helpful. You can find us on Twitter at sportsinfo_SIS, at FB Outsiders. I'm at Matt Mano, and he's at FO_A Shots. Sports Info Solutions is also on Instagram at Sports Info Solutions. For my co-host, Aaron Schatz, our injury expert, John Verros, and our producer, Justin Stein, I'm Matt Manocherian, and thank you for joining us for the latest episode of the Off the Charts Football Podcast.